David Brooks, Obama's favorite Republican. I thought this was an interesting commentary on the Trump verdict last week. This is when he does this dog and pony show with Jonathan Capehart from the New York Times he's also the New York Times, on government-run media and taxpayer finance media every week. But Brooks, the consummate institutional man, the consummate sort of faux centrist, a representative, as we were talking about earlier, of the sort of center or center-right intellect that MAGA world is revolting against, particularly after the conviction. Sean Davis, wants to know from Republican candidates for every office, which Democrats are you going to go after to put in jail? Tit for tat. Mm-hmm. And others, the Larry Hogans of the world, the David Brookses of the world, he goes even further than Larry Hogan did, respect the verdict. David Brooks says, actually, not should you just respect the verdict, but in point of fact, it was the right verdict.
Yeah, I'll go back to Jonathan's phrase, the before times. In the before times, I was working at National Review, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, the Weekly Standard, a lot of conservative places. And there were certain pillars of conservatism. The first is moral character. That character is destiny, and if private virtue falls apart, the public order collapses. And we shouldn't forget the fact this case was about a former president paying hush money to a porn star. I mean, in what world did we enter that? The second is institutions and the power of institutions to safeguard society and hold off barbarism. And there was a moment that some of the people who were in the courtroom described when the jury asked the judge to read back some of the technical fineries of the indictment and of how they should think about the law. And apparently it was very dry and technocratic language. And yet the members of the jury looked at the judge with a rapt reverence. And I've always found in juries that juries take their responsibilities very seriously. And so this is character and institutions. And Donald Trump is, if nothing else, a transgressor. And if he wins in the fall, the attack on the institutions won't only be to the justice system, it'll be to the Defense Department, it'll be to the Attorney General's office. It will be a comprehensive assault on American institutions. And that's sort of what's at stake. Can those institutions hold? And in my view, yesterday they did.
They did.
Well, first of all, he acted so surprised that a president was with somebody. Bill Clinton and Paula Jones, they were together, and she famously had a press conference and was holding up the check that he wrote her for $112,000. Please don't get indignant about that.
The attack on the justice system is to come. It hasn't happened yet, according to David Brooks. Huh.
Okay.
That's one perspective. For another, we're pleased to be joined by Mike Gonzalez. He's an expert on critical race theory and identity politics and foreign policy with experience as a journalist and former speechwriter in the W administration. He's the co-author of the recently released Next Gen Marxism, What Is It and How to Combat It. Mike, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan and Amy, and I'm very disappointed to have heard David speak in that manner. That was an outrageous verdict and outrageous, obviously, trial.
Yeah, so crawl into the mind of David Brooks, because he represents sort of that effete, self-styled centrist who, I guess, was once upon a time more of a self-styled conservative, but now can't stomach what conservatism is, I suppose. Because Trump has poisoned the well. This is sort of the position that people like Brooks has taken. So the idea that the institutions held, and that there is sort of he just sort of glosses over all the institutional rot that actually he otherwise has written much about over the past couple of decades.
The thing is, and this is what my co-author, Catherine Cornell Gorka, and I chronicle in our book, is that the institutions have been infiltrated. A lot of the institutions, not necessarily, look, there's a lot of problems with the DOJ, the FBI, the CIA, et cetera. It's a different kind of problem. The institutions that have been infiltrated by Marxists, by cultural Marxists, are the ones that are in the culture-making realm, the universities, the libraries, the museums, the schools, and that is what we chronicle. What has happened at the DOJ and the FBI and a lot of the alphabet soup institutions that are outside my window here in Washington D.C. is they have been the DOJ was weaponized. I mean, a guy was sent from the DOJ to the New York prosecutor's office to work there to shepherd this trial, to shepherd these charges. I mean, this was it's going to be overturned, no question. But the damage has been done in terms of what people think. I haven't looked at polls yet, and we really shouldn't look at polls for weeks because it's going to take a little bit of time to digest. But this is no matter where you stand on Trump, no matter, this was a very sad day. I'd rather obviously talk about my book, but that was a very sad day last week. A very sad day.
In your estimate, what crime was committed?
I don't think any crime was committed. I don't think. I think it was. I think the prosecutor Bragg created this. Said, well, this paperwork was done wrong, and for that, a man was hit with 34 criminal charges, and he was found guilty of 34 crimes that were really created out of thin air.
Yeah, right. 34 counts of not liking Trump. He was convicted. We were just talking with Steve Bucci from the Heritage Foundation about a little bit about this, but we'll get your perspective. These statements that were issued by Al Qaeda and the Iranian supreme leader praising the model Hamas protesters on college campuses across the country. And by the way, I saw that there's an encampment back up at Columbia. They're like locusts. They're just difficult to dispense with. The Iranian supreme leader, a letter dated May 25th. Dear university students of the United States of America, this message is an expression of our empathy and solidarity with you. As the page of history is turning, you are standing on the right side of it. You have now formed a branch of the resistance front. And he goes on to say, the support and solidarity of your professors is a significant and consequential development. This can offer some measure of comfort in the face of your government's police brutality. But boy, what an endorsement between Al Qaeda and the Iranian supreme leader. All of these protesters, particularly at our quote unquote elite schools, are essentially in liege with those terrorist organizations, terrorist state in the case of Iran.
Yeah, this is a man who does not tell you what his pronouns are, who does not believe in microaggressions, and who would not put up too well with gender theories. To put it mildly, since they execute gay any aspect of LGBTQIA homosexuals in Iran. No, look, I'm finishing now a paper actually. What I'm trying to demonstrate in this paper is that the support infrastructure for the pro-Hamas. By the way, this is the first time I talk about it. For the pro-Palestinian protests, is exactly the same as the infrastructure that supported BLM in the riots of 2020. If you break down the infrastructures into activist groups, fiscal sponsors, funders, and radical media that promote and amplify the messages and try to get people to protest in the streets, all components are the same as the ones that supported BLM in 2020. All they care about is dismantling the United States. They're opportunists. So when Gaza comes out, oh yeah, sure they use that. When George Floyd comes out, oh sure they'll use that. What they want to do is destabilize the United States, and of course they have the aid of all our adversaries overseas, not just Iran, but China is very much into this. Cuba, Venezuela, anybody who hates us wants to see this and promotes this.
Well, everybody, not everybody, but there's a lot of conservatives, especially after last week, spoiling for a revolt against this neo-Jacobin ruling class that controls the mediating institutions that you're describing. But what does it look like? What are material steps that can be taken to push the moral and intellectual revolution that's that's required, or cleanup if you don't like the word revolution?
Look, Katie and I have a chapter on solutions. To put it briefly, our president here at Heritage, Kevin Roberts, says that we need to figure out which institutions we can reform and which institutions are too far gone and we have to abandon. I personally think we have to fight for the universities, the selective universities. This is Harvard and Columbia and Brown do not belong to the woke left. They belong to America. We have to fight for them. We have to reform them. How do we do that? By threatening to withdraw federal money. They rake in. Harvard takes in $500 million in taxpayer money every year. It takes in more money from the taxpayer than it does in tuition, and that is through federal grants, through student loans, through research grants, etc. So what you do is you say, well, as long as you continue to do this, as long as your faculties are 100% leftist, not a single conservative among the professors, and so as long as you continue to do this, we're not going to give you any more money, and that gets their attention.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because the Wall Street Journal weekend interview was with Harvey Mansfield. It was basically the last conservative standing before he retired from Harvard after 5 decades, poli-sci professor. He is not particularly sanguine about the prospects at Harvard or anywhere else. Some of it is direct, and other parts of the interview you can read between the lines. And I don't even know at this point, when you've got a $50 billion endowment, if cutting off federal funds, if that's even material to an institution like Harvard.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Obviously, it's a lot easier with state schools, as the governor of Florida and the governor of Texas have done with DEI. It says you cannot, you cannot practice DEI anymore. You're going to have a DEI staff. You have to. So with state schools, yeah, it's automatic, right? They get taxpayer funding, and the legislatures can do anything. Not anything, but the legislatures can do a lot. With the private schools, it's going to be a lot tougher. But I do think that the threat of cutting off funding, taxpayer funding, would start getting their attention. Look, Harvard has just said it's not going to make statements anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Harvard and a lot of the other schools have said, look, we're going to start using again SATs. They stopped using SATs and other standardized tests because they thought that they were going to help social justice by lowering standards. That is obviously insulting, stupid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now they're going back on themselves and saying, well, we made a mistake there. We're gonna go back to using. So they're making some small incremental steps, taking some small incremental steps that make me hopeful that maybe we're getting somewhere with the universities. Maybe I'm being too optimistic.
Mike Gonzalez, expert on critical race theory, identity politics, and foreign policy, former journalist and speechwriter for the W administration. His new book, he's the co-author of Next Gen Marxism, What Is It and How to Combat It? Next Gen Marxism is the book. Mike Gonzalez, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean.